Hello there and welcome to episode 70 of Right Where You Are Sitting Now, the podcast for the site sittingnow.co.uk. 70, it's a big number.
Yep, Oz Anahigo Torso, it's quite an important number in the Kabbalah, and that gives a bit of a hint of this week's exciting episode.
It does. We are returning to Crowley land in some ways.
I don't think we ever leave it, do we?
Yeah, it's true. But yes, our guest this week is Mr. Trevor Gray, and he's a more recent author, but an experienced occultist, we should say.
With fascinating links with various occult organisations, and a person I understand of rank in those, so a good representative of certain fraternities.
And what would you say we're talking about today then, Mark?
Well, I mean, he's written a number of books to his name, Mr. Gray, and in particular is from Manhood to Godhead, which the basic premises of which is it's a sort of narrator he reincarnates for a number of different incarnations, all based, and each incarnation sort of explores or tries to explore in some sense the cataclysmic tree of life. So, and that's charged with the cover of which is charged with the Hierophant card, a revealer of sacred things, so Mr. Gray is well placed for that. And the figures we encounter are ones we've touched on before, and so we reintroduce some new, some familiar, through the mists of time, the shades of Count Cagliostro, Saint Germain, the Knights Templar, Paracelsus, the great Paracelsus, the alchemist, and of course Crowley right towards the end, and it's a very rich read, very rich.
He's also written a more recent book called A Whisper in the Silence, which is it's more of a I guess it has a broader appeal in its presentation, but also contains elements of Crowley and other important spiritual teachers, but yeah, it also comes from a naturist perspective, or nudist perspective.
Yeah, that's something we haven't done a nude podcast yet.
Well, I mean, we do the podcast in nude every week.
Just as well, it's not visual.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Sitting Now is audio only.
That's right. That would poison your minds and your dreams forever. I expect. So I hope our friends in podcast land will concur with us that this they're tuning their crystal sets to the starry ether to receive the sagacity and charm of Mr. Gray.
Indeed. So let's cut across to that interview now, and we'll see you on the other side. Hello, Trevor Gray. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I was wondering, could you give us a brief biography of yourself, please?
Hello, yes. Nice to be speaking to you. And I'll also say, because I do believe some Thelemites listen to this, so for any Thelemites out there, I'll just say, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. My name is indeed Trevor Gray. It is spelt with an A, by the way, Gray. I'll say that because in case you search on Amazon, you can do it by putting my name in about my book. So it's Gray. So I'll just mention that at the beginning, all right? I'm the author of 2 published books at the moment, the historical occult novel From Manhood to Godhead, The Many Lives of Jean Vassar, and also the naturist love story, A Whisper in the Silence. I've been a member of the UK Grand Lodge of Ordo Templi Orientis for 22 years and Grand Treasurer General for the past 17 years. I'm also a bishop of Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, the Gnostic Catholic Church. Career-wise, I took early retirement 12 years ago to concentrate on writing, having spent my entire working life in the wonderful world of show business. As a teenager in the 1960s, I played drums in local pop bands and gigged briefly as a stand-up comedian. Professionally, I initially worked as an actor, but went on to become a personality disc jockey, as it were called then, in the latter half of the 1970s for the Rank organisation in Brighton. After running a voiceover agency in London's West End, I moved into theatre management, where I worked successfully for 28 years as operations manager for the 3 theatres and the cinema in Worthing.
Oh, excellent.
That's it in a nutshell.
There we go. Brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about your acting career, because that's pretty interesting. Could you tell us a little bit, how did you get into acting? What was the kind of, what led you in that direction?
Well, it wasn't immediate. It was something I'd been involved in from an amateur point of view. I'd helped start a youth theatre in Littlehampton, and I was heavily involved in that, acting and then directing. And obviously, so I had a great chance to practice my acting and to develop it. But when I first left school, I was too young to actually attend drama school. So I started training as a certified accountant. I had no interest whatsoever in that sort of thing, but my father happened to know one of the partners in the company. Now, little did I know, of course, at that particular time, that such training would many years later prove to be so helpful when I was to be made Grand Treasurer General of the UK Grand Lodge of OTO. Anyway, after just a year or so of doing this accountancy, I applied for training at a drama school. I auditioned at the Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art in London and got accepted for their 3-year actor training course. Now, in those days, equity union membership was very important because it was still a closed shop then. You had to have an equity card to work in the theatre, and most theatre companies were allowed to employ 2 non-equity members. They would give them 2 provisional cards. So if you actually had an equity card, it was a great benefit when you actually left drama school. And I was fortunate to get mine before leaving by doing some stand-up comedy gigs in working men's club, restaurants and nightclubs under the equity variety contract. So as I left school with the benefit of having an equity card. My first professional acting job was in the 1970s with the Midlands Arts Theatre in Birmingham. It was a modern musical called Downright Hooligan. It was actually based on some of the infamous muggings that had taken place in Birmingham. A rather strange subject, I think you agree, but it made a good musical. In that, I not only acted, but also played the drums as well. Then I did a show in their outdoor arena theatre in Cannon Hill, which was called Cosmic Comic Circus. Now, in the first half, I played Godzilla, the world's only drumming gorilla, in the full appropriate gorilla outfit. And in the second half, I played a very famous comic strip hero, The Thing. Now, for that, of course, I'm only 5'7", and The Thing was quite a monster. So I had this big padded costume on and high heels and things like that, all built up, made me very, very big.
Was that The Thing from the Fantastic Four? Or
I believe it was, yes. Yeah. Anyway, as a gorilla, I used to appear high up on top of this open air arena theatre, kind of thumping my chest in the gorilla world, that sort of thing, a bit like something, one of these horror films or whatever. And I would grab a rope and swing down into the centre over the circus ring, slide down the rope, and then do my drumming to I'm the King of the Jungle, that kind of thing as well. Well, one particular performance, unfortunately, I missed the rope and I fell and I sprained my ankle. So after that, unfortunately, Godzilla, the world's only drumming gorilla, had to walk about with a limp. But because I'd also played The Thing, of course, it also meant this comic hero thing, he also had a limp, which obviously must have looked quite strange, to say the least. I did various theatre work after that, including tours with a company called Polka, which mainly did shows for children. We went to some very big number one touring theatres with them, though, and I worked there as an actor and also as a puppeteer as well, which is another skill I learned. One of my favourite roles, acting-wise, was with another company where I played Mercutio in a modern-day version of Romeo and Juliet. Now, as it was modern-day set, rather than using rapier swords, we used knives instead. Despite my being awarded a certificate of merit by the British Board of Fright Directors, stage fright directors, when I was at drama school, and lots of very careful rehearsals, in the very first performance, I was stabbed in the hand. As you can imagine, there was quite a bit of blood. And the amusing thing was that I was speaking to some of the audience after the show, and one said to me, "Great performance, enjoyed it very much, but I do think the stage blood could have looked a bit more realistic." So I was pleased to inform that it was in fact real blood and it wasn't meant to have happened. Oh, yeah. A great benefit of my acting days was meeting my wife-to-be, Rosie. Of course, we eventually got married. She became my wife. And she was an actress. We met on a tour. We did a tour together, met the first day in the rehearsal studios, and we did this tour together, and kind of romance blossomed, I suppose, during that tour. She did theatre work, but also a great deal of TV work, some serious plays and that, but also some very well-known comedy series of the time. She was in Please Sir, and she was in Beggar My Neighbour, The Goodies, and the one that everyone wants to hear about, of course, was Dad's Army. She did 3 episodes of Dad's Army. Yeah. And of course, those episodes are still being shown on television, quite often. She does get repeat fees still from all those things, but if Dad's Army is on BBC, she does much better than if it's on one of the kind of funny small channels or whatever on television. But so as I say, she did a lot of television, but that's how we met on tour in a play. As I mentioned earlier, I got into DJ work. And I did know that when a Christmas came, I could actually earn more doing DJ work than I would doing panto. And so I started doing some DJ work in some nightclubs. And I was spotted by the rank organisation, who offered me the position of resident DJ at their Top Rank Suite, as it was called then, in Brighton, for 4 years. And it was a big venue. It still is, of course. It's called something different now. But I was playing to up to 2,000 people a night, playing every sort of music you can imagine, from ballroom dancing on a Monday night, this kind of strict tempo, the Strictly thing, to it was punk music. Punk rock came in. That was also the 70s, of course, to the glam rock period. So I was dressed up in bright colour satin and that kind of gear on stage for those nights. We did private function. We did all sorts of things. So it was a very varied career. The problem for me was when they extended the licensing hours and the hours that the club was open. And when it got to like being open to 2 o'clock in the morning, it was just too much for me. So I wanted to kind of, to kind of do something different. I had run a voiceover agency in between, by the way, in London's West End. So anyway, I was offered the position of operations manager at Worthing's Three Theatres Cinema, as I mentioned earlier. And I worked there for nearly 28 years. And then, again, as I mentioned earlier, I took retirement 12 years ago. So the early retirement, so I could concentrate on my writing. And that is about me, I think, and my acting career, as much as I can tell you.
And I understand, Mr. Gray, that you do have links with the Connaught Theatre as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I never appeared at the Connaught Theatre as an actor. Rosie did. She appeared. I actually saw her in 2 plays at the Connaught, because I used to go along, when I was born in Littlehampton along the coast. So I used to go along to Worthing and as a member of the audience before I went to drama school to see plays. And she was in 2 plays there. And of course I saw in them, and not ever imagining that one day we'd meet and one day we'd actually get married. So that was great. But when I was operation manager of Worthing Theatres, it was at one point a trust, but then it was taken over by the council, which I work for. And so they amalgamated them all. So we looked after the Pavilion Theatre, Assembly Hall, and the Connaught Theatre as well as the cinema, which is attached to the Connaught Theatre. That's another strange thing as well, because in the 1960s, I was playing drums with local pop bands and things, and we used to go to the Assembly Hall and the Pavilion because all the top bands of those days used to appear there. There was no Brighton Centre then. There was the Dome, I believe, but no Brighton Centre. You got all the top bands. I remember seeing the Who 3 times. I remember seeing all sorts of things. The busiest I ever saw it was when a guy who I always admired a lot, a guy called Arthur Brown. You may remember that the Crazy World of Arthur Brown, his number one hit was Fire.
Yeah, my father was really obsessed with him.
Well, when Fire was number one on top of the pops and so forth, he was actually at the assembly, when he appeared at the Pavilion first, when a band called Vanilla Fudge, I think, had cancelled. But then I saw him again, as I say, and that was absolutely packed. There were more people outside the assembly hall than in, because they just couldn't get tickets. So many people wanted to get inside. So I never imagined we used to go and see wonderful, top bands, and one day I'd be working there as operations manager. So that's another thing which was totally unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, you over the years, you must have met a great deal of celebrities and famous people. I mean, the Coronet, the association for me and the Coronet is that I happen to know, and it's significant to some people, it's where Peter Cushing, the famous horror actor, he started his career long before you. I mean, his first time he walked the boards was at the Coronet. And also, the other thing I happen to know about is that Wanda Ventham, who's the mother of the famous Cumberbatch actor, she was a university student for art university student, and then she started to paint the scenery for the Connaught Theatre, and that's how she ended up finding her way into the stage and into the theatre and so on. So for me, they're the associations with that.
Well, that's good. I mean, the Connaught Theatre is very important. I mean, Worthing has 3 theatres, and at times the council have tried to close one of them, at least down, because of the funding costs. I believe it's run as a trust now. In fact, now since I left, I'm fairly sure it is. But they have tried at times to close them down. They're important. They're 3 different theatres. The Pavilion Theatre, lovely proscenium arch theatre. The Connaught Theatre is proscenium arches, when the Assembly was obviously a concert hall. The difference, though, are things, for example, like the acoustics aren't as good for bespoke and unamplified voice in the Pavilion as they are at the Connaught Theatre. That's the best place for plays. The Assembly Hall is wonderful for classical music. The acoustics there are really wonderful for classical music. And each of those venues has got its own attributes, makes it special. But certainly the Connaught Theatre, so many actors and actresses had their early days there. So it's important, obviously, that is kept alive. I think that, I did obviously meet actors and actresses at the Connaught Theatre, but I met far more people on the variety side at the Pavilion Assembly, a lot of big names, established names. Some are sadly passed on now, of course, but I remember the dear old Bob Monkhouse, who you may remember. He was a lovely man. He was the comedian's comedian. When he got into town, he would buy the local paper so that he could make his patter completely, what's happening in the town and everything. He knew what was happening. He was a lovely man, he was. And so many others, well, I met. It was such a privilege to meet these wonderful, wonderful big stars. I do think I was very, very lucky in doing that. And most of them were really, really nice people as well.
Going back to what my reference points, I mean, we without the Connaught, and we ultimately wouldn't have Peter Cushing or Wanda Ventham there we are. You see, we wouldn't have had the Blood Beast Terror, 1968. There we go.
No, that's right.
Many other great works.
I'm not sure that would be a great loss. The Blood Beast Terror. It's not my favourite of Cushing's films, but we do love Peter Cushing on this show. So I gather from your books, and I'm not sure which order to approach this question in. I was going to ask you about your interest, what sort of spurred your interest in the occult, but I also know you had an experience that might have led to that. So I'm not sure which way round that occurs.
Okay, I'll talk about how I got into the occult first, and then move into the mystical experience, because I use that experience in both my books.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It really backed on me. And perhaps I could actually read that short piece from Whisper in the Silence, where Ollie, the central character, he's describing what happens to him, because actually it's exactly the same happened to me. I was using my own experience in that. But just as how I got interested in it, you'll be, I'm sure, very interested to know that I was actually brought up a Christian. I wasn't pressurized into going to church by my parents, but I didn't mind going. It was Church of England, I attended. It was also high church. You know, in the Church of England, there's high and low church. The high church tend to be more ceremonial, I suppose, more splendor about it, that sort of thing. So there was that to it. And so I quite enjoyed that, looking at that side of it. And when I was 12, I became confirmed. I'd already been baptized, obviously, as a child, and I was confirmed at 12. And I really got into it. And I became a server when I was old enough to. I used to carry the cross, the candle in the processions. I used to assist the priest up at the altar and so forth. And not just on Sundays, but on a weekday too. I got very early in the morning, go and do the mass with the priest, sometimes the vicar, sometimes be just 2 or 3 people there in the congregation. But I enjoyed doing that, and I go into work after that, of course, to the accountancy when I was working there. There was a missionary attached to the church who was a very genuine, interesting guy. And I used to sit talking to him about religion and so forth. He was very convincing as well about Christianity at the time. And after talking to him at one point, I actually thought I might like to become a priest. As it turned out, of course, that it wasn't a Christian priest I turned out to be. Anyway, I went on to drama school, and obviously I wasn't attending church anymore. And one of the actresses who was in the same group as me there, training group, she had a boyfriend who was a druid. He'd actually been a Wiccan, and he'd belonged to Alexander's coven. But he left after they had a big disagreement, the two of them. In fact, I witnessed a psychic battle between them one night. We'd been invited to this actress and her boyfriend's flat, and it was absolutely uncanny. I mean, it was all the things of a Hammer horror story. There were windows blowing up. Sorry, windows were closed, but there were gales kind of going through the room. He was lighting black candles, which weren't blowing out despite this wind. The girl I went with, she was carrying behind a sofa. She was so frightened by all this. I was just totally intrigued by it. And of course, all these words were being said, which meant nothing to me at all at the time and so forth. But I was actually really, my interest grew because of that, I think. And so I started buying books on the subject and became really interested in it. And
really sorry to interrupt you there. I was just very intrigued. I mean, so that was Alexander's. That was an experience with Alexander. So what was your personal impression of Alexander's? Because he has a sort of a mix.
Well, I never met him because I mean, I was actually this guy was a druid who also happened to belong to Alexander's coven. Then fell out with him. He did actually get friendly with him again, and he did say that perhaps I could like to go and meet him. And I knew at the time, I'd read that Alexander's had a wonderful occult library. I'd love to have seen that, but I never arranged, never had that chance. Although I was invited to, an actual appointment or date was never made for me to go along and meet him. So that never happened, which is a shame, because he was an interesting character, both him and his wife Maxine at the time. And I'd like to have met him. That would have been interesting. I did meet another. Meeting down that way.
It would made our podcast more interesting.
So anyway, so that's how. And I think there was another occasion when there was some druids who were practicing for some event. They did that on some hill in London every year, some big event. I can't remember the hill now, somewhere. And somehow I got roped in to go along to one of their rehearsals in a flat. And I remember being given a can of. It was meant to be some kind of sacred thing, like a chalice or something like that. And as I hadn't got the actual object set at the time, I was given a can of brass. I remember I had to stand there, kind of treating this can of brass with great reverence while they went through this rehearsal. I never saw the finished performance. I wasn't engaged in it at all. But that was another thing I got somehow involved in. As I say, that's what started my interest in the occult. Really, I think that, and changed my mind about Christianity in the long term as well. You did mention about my mystical experience. Now, let me say first of all, it was quite a simple experience. It's one that a lot of people have had. But let me first describe it. So I used it in my book, both books. I'd like to read this short bit from A Whisper in the Silence. This is describing Ollie Longbridge's central character's experience, because it was exactly the same as I had. So in reading this, you're hearing about mine as well. The completely unexpected psychic experience was hypnagogic, I think I presented that right, meaning it occurred in those transitional moments between wakefulness and sleep. He had been starting to doze off when he became aware that he was entering a long, dark tunnel. At the end of it, in the far distance, was a blindingly bright white light. Its intensity had initially forced him to shield his eyes from the rays, but gradually they adjusted. About halfway between him and this light stood a strange but non-threatening hooded figure, dressed entirely in black. Its right hand was making a beckoning gesture, its soothing voice repeatedly whispering, "Come, come, come." Without the slightest trepidation, he had started to walk towards the mysterious entity. Inexplicably, with each step he took, he felt increasing tranquility. Never in his entire life had he encountered such peacefulness and well-being. Then he stopped. Not that he wanted to, for he was curious and inspired by what was happening, but something made him. "No, I have to go back," he told the figure reluctantly, but knowingly. As he slowly turned and retraced his steps away from the light, the vision of the voice began to slowly fade until it was no more. And he found himself, just like I did, back in his bed, eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling. That was how it happened to me. It happened in Brighton. Rosie was in our flat at the same time. She wasn't in the same room when that happened. As I say, it wasn't bedtime or anything. I was in that state before we went to sleep. So I was half awake, half asleep when it happened. Now, had that just been a dream or whatever, I'd have probably forgotten it by the next morning, as one does with dreams, unless you'd note it down in your magical diary or whatever, because, these sort of things perhaps are just some little event. But this quite simple thing had so much impact on me. And the actual end thing was that I realized, we can exist outside the human body. And so I started to take an interest in it, like Ollie does in the book, looked into it, and found that a similar thing had happened to lots of other people. Often it was described as a near-death experience. I don't think I was dying that night. I do sometimes wonder if I hadn't said no and gone back, whether something would have happened to me. But of course, I did make a decision like Ollie, and I actually did make a decision to come back again. But although it was something quite simple, I know it's happened to probably millions of other people, but that quite simple event changed my way of believing from a spiritual point of view completely. So then I started looking into things like reincarnation, into all sorts of occult and supernatural aspects and things like that. But that, as I say, quite simple experience had that profound effect on me. I think I was very, very lucky to have it exactly when I did.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We've been watching and reading. Well, I've certainly been reading a lot about a character called Robert A. Monroe. He's an American scientist who had a very similar experience, actually, and he's the man who coined the term out-of-body experience as well. He ran something called the Monroe Institute, and it's kind of interesting. Again, it had this equivalent kind of profound effect on him, where it kind of completely changed the course of his life, essentially. And these experiences, regardless of like how grand they are, do seem to have this kind of this big change agent effect kind of thing, as you were on their lives,
and also as well, superficially, somebody listening could say, "Oh well, it's just a dream," but actually, I know. I mean, I've had a comparable experience, and Ken's had a comparable experience, and it's like a completely one-off thing, and it's not like any other dream. It's not like and I think you very eloquently emphasised the importance there that it's a life-changing experience, and it's you can never really shake it off. It does change your your whole view of things. And I think that's the most significant thing that it leaves you with, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, other little things happen as well. I can remember, for example, when I was at school, I had a weekend job in working on Saturdays for Key Markets, one of the supermarket chains. It's gone now, but it used to be Key Markets. And that was in Rustington, and I lived in Littlehampton. And I used to cycle down this lane, as it was then. I think it was all built up down the lane. And there was a road, and then at the bottom of it was a very, very busy road. And I'd been late the previous couple of Saturdays. I was kind of told, if you're late again, I'm sorry, we can't continue this kind of part-time job for you, this Saturday job. And So going the third Saturday running, I was cycling down there. The brakes didn't work on my bike. I got to the end of that road where the busy road crossed it, and I just fell off the bicycle. And as I fell off the bicycle, a huge lorry went tearing past. If I hadn't fallen off, I'd have been under that lorry. Now, I was stunned, obviously, from falling off. I got up, looked around. There was nothing on the road, nothing why I should fall. Why should I suddenly always be thrown off my bicycle? So that, again, was quite a thing that made me think, why? Why did I come off that bicycle at the time? Because it saved my life by falling off it without any doubt at all.
Yeah. And coming back also to that visionary experience, because I think that's what we're talking about here, is that, in From Manhood to Godhead, one of the recurring themes is the figure, the main narrator, waking up in the middle of the night and hearing the voice and seeing this light and so on. I must confess, it did make me think at times. There's a Frankie Howard film called Up the Chastity Belt, and he's woken up. He's woken up in the night. Because as it turns out, I don't know how I got onto this subject, but as it turns out, he plays two roles. He plays Richard the Lionheart, and he plays like this sort of servant, this lowly figure. And they're like, they're separated at birth, and this voice comes to him in the night and tells him his destiny. And I couldn't help thinking of that in the best possible sense of the word.
Well, why not? I mean, great if it makes you do other things as well like that. That's all the better. That's great. No, I enjoy that. Good to hear it.
So I've heard, I've seen in other interviews as well, you mentioned that prior to, we'll discuss the ATO in a minute, but prior to the ATO, you joined a different occult organization. And I was wondering, because I know nothing about this, it'd be really interesting to hear about this.
Right. Well, let me see now. Okay. Well, I was still a Christian, as I say, and my wife and I were invited to a party by another Wiccan, in fact. This one I did actually get to meet several times. That was Ralph Harvey, who lived in Hove at the time. And I remember we invited to we obviously weren't part of his coven or anything, but we got to know him. And of course, he used to be involved in providing theatrical costumes for various productions and things. So there was that theatrical contact, I suppose, there. And in fact, when I was a DJ at the Top Rank Suite in Brighton, I employed him once to be the rider on a headless rider on a horse outside for a publicity thing for our Halloween dance that particular year. So he was dressed up in his costumes. He appeared to have no head on a horse. So we kind of did a bit of work together like that. But I remember we were invited to a party at his place, and I was introduced as, "This is Trevor the Christian," which amongst Wiccans, I must have stood out a bit, I think. But there we are. Anyway, I mean, I did by then have grave doubts about Christianity. I'd started reading, let's say, so many books about the subject that I came across so many untruths. I actually thought I'd been cheated on pretty badly, told things which evidently weren't true and so forth. And although I try not to be anti-Christian, I personally do have a problem with the Christian religion, and I find it so hypocritical as well. The sort of thing happens with priests and children and things like that, completely hypocritical. There we are. And as Pope Leo X is reputed to have said, this myth of Christ has served us well, and I would go along with that myself anyway. So as I say, I was still a Christian at that point, and my wife had heard about an order which was in several parts of the country. There was a branch in Brighton at the time, and she was going along just to have a meeting with them, see if she was interested, they were interested in her joining maybe and so forth. And it was simply known as the work, which is obviously a term used by occults a lot to complete the work, the great work and so forth. It was just known as the work. Its head had a connection with someone who at some time was certainly involved in the Golden Dawn. I'm not going to actually give his name, but he's passed on now. But he is mentioned in Ithel Colquhoun's book, Sword of Wisdom, which of course is about MacGregor Mathers and the Golden Dawn, and his name is mentioned in there. So he obviously had some connection. Well, my wife was completely surprised that I took an interest in this. She was a Christian still, but she was surprised to say, well, in fact, I've got doubts coming in by then about Christianity. But I felt like I was coming home when they started talking about things that they did and the sort of ceremonies. And I was attracted to it. Whether I'd been in something similar in a previous life, I don't know, but I was attracted to it. So my wife and I joined. We were lucky. We rose through the degrees fairly quickly, or some of them. The one thing, though, was it was quite Celtic in its approach as to the occult. And I never really felt that much link to the Celtic side. So in the end, we both decided to leave. It was a big thing to do so. It's quite heart-wrenching at the time, but I decided I needed to leave and move on. And my intention was to do some solo magical work rather than group work. And of course, I got more insights to Crowley doing that. But then that's when I discovered the OTO. If I could just move on to that, that's okay, because the head of the order of the work had actually talked to me about Crowley. Their rituals were a strange kind of mixture, some of Crowley's words, some from different sources, kind of mixed together. Peculiar mix, but it kind of worked. But so I had a couple of Crowley's books already, and I remember I bought my first copy of Crowley's Magic. I bought a second-hand shop in Worthing for £10. And the head of the order said to me, he thought it was quite a bit of money then, but he said, if you can afford to keep that book, one day it'll become very important and useful to you. And of course, that's how it turned out. So whether he foresaw something, I don't know, but so it turned out. So I got hooked. I bought more and more Crowley books, of course, including as well the wonderful book that he received, the Book of the Law. So you probably asked me why the OTO. Well, initially, of course, it was about Aleister Crowley and his writings. The more I read about Thelema, it appealed greatly, as did what I read about the OTO. At the time, I didn't realize the OTO was still going. I had no idea. I thought it was something in the past and finished. But then I bought my first laptop, and I sat at the table and I put into Google, I Googled Ordo Templi Orientis, and it came up, and I shouted to my friend, it's still going, it's going, the OTO's still going. And not only that, I found that there was at the time an encampment in Brighton as well. Just wonderful. So my wife then, she thought, well, okay, I'll come along with you as well. So we both went along, and we met up there in Brighton with some of the members, and they seemed to take to us as we did to them. And so we applied to take A Monroe degrees, which we took in Hastings back in the year 2000. So 22 years ago. Since then, we've both been fortunate to progress in their degrees and grades. And also, we've had the chance to travel abroad to meet up with some wonderful members in quite a few different countries. My wife and I also became a priest and priestess of the EGC, Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, the Gnostic Catholic Church. And eventually, we made bishops as well. So we hold that position still. So I'm Grand Treasurer General of the UK Grand Lodge. And also, as I say, we are bishops as well. And so we're both very, very involved. My wife's my assistant treasurer, and she's involved as well, from very much involved in all aspects of it.
And also, Mrs. Gray, stepping back in your narrative, I mean, one of the things, from Manhood to Godhead, I found it a very rich read. In fact, I'm starting my second reading today, as it happens.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that. I'm so pleased.
And there's obviously lots of. There's a cast of thousands. You could, if you could make it into a film, who would be? Well, you couldn't have. You would have to have different leads, wouldn't you? But anyways, that wasn't my question. My question was, there's like lots of ideas in it. So it's a cauldron. There's a fantastic seething cauldron of concepts and ideas. And one of the things I found fascinating and at times frustrating, if dare I say, is that I could see there was this other philosophy there, not the Thelemic thing, but this previous thing, and trying to pick the bones out of it. I mean, would at any time would you ever consider writing like a straight sort of essay, sort of setting out that worldview, that perspective, those ideas,
That was my original idea. Actually, it was the original idea of both books. I mean, the naturist one as well. The idea of the Manhood of Godhead was that the way that came about was how I came to write from Manhood to Godhead was it was about 2004. I remember standing in the kitchen of the venue that was used by OTO Shemesh Lodge in Hastings. And I was talking to some of the other members while my wife Rosie was making some coffees for us. And now I'd written some serious articles in the Shemesh Lodge magazine, Soreth. It was called Soreth. And I've written one about the Cathars, about the Knights Templar. I think I've written one about Paracelsus and Sen and Well. And the idea was I was writing these kind of straight, articles about them. And I'd had this idea about, wouldn't it be wonderful if someone could learn from the teachings of all these wonderful occult characters throughout the years by being reincarnated a number of times, so they could personally meet them, about talk to them. And I put this idea to a few of the members standing around. It was a great idea. So I thought, well, okay, I'll have a go at doing this. That's how it came to be fiction rather than a factual book. Now, at the time, I thought I knew quite a bit, not just about Crowley, but about all these other wonderful historical characters in the book. It was only when I actually came to start writing on us, I knew actually very, very little. So a great deal of research was needed, and that's why it took so long to write. I never thought it'd be 644 pages, but that's how it turned out. But so that's how that came about. Yes, it could have well been a straight book. The same with A Whisper in the Silence as well. My original intention was to write a book about the importance of silence, how important that was, especially in occult work, through meditation and silence from all different aspects, keeping silence as well and various things. But again, I wanted to reach a wider readership. And so I decided to make that into a novel as well. And also, I do think of myself more, I'm not an academic, I think of myself as a creative writer. And so writing novels, I think, is more suited to me. I actually read again, because it was actually published in 2019 originally, for Manhood and Godhead. I thought I'd better read it again because it's so long since I last read it. And I did notice, and I hope perhaps you noticed this, Mark, reading it through, that I could see how over that period of time my writing skills improved as well. And I hope that was the case. From the first chapter right through to that last chapter, how they improved. And I think it improved even more with The Whisper in Silence as well, because obviously practice makes perfect. I'd written articles, I say, for Soreth and a few other things as well. But I'd also, by the way, tried to write other books. I had many ideas for books, and it's an old thing. You start off, you write the first page, it gets put down. That's why they say just writing and completing a book is a great achievement in itself, purely because to actually complete a book does take a lot of effort. There's times you almost give up. You just feel, I haven't got this drive, I can't do it. And then you think, well, if I do give up, it's all being wasted. So you push yourself to go on. And also when I'm writing, I have to have a kind of routine. So I tend to do jobs around the house, do stuff, shopping, that sort of thing in the mornings. And then I tend, when I'm writing, to write every afternoon from, say, 2 to 7 o'clock, straight through, sometimes a little bit later, because that way you get the continuity. I unfortunately didn't have that continuity all the time when I wrote for Manhood and Godhead, because we had problems. I was working at the time, of course, until I took early retirement. So it meant that I was doing a full-time job. I was Grand Treasurer General as well, so I had to come home and do my Grand Treasurer General work in the evening. So that was a difficulty. We also had a fire in our house at one point. It was a dehumidifier, and it burst into flames. Although I put it out, putting myself in hospital by inhaling smoke, what it did mean was the whole house was filled with smoke, and a dehumidifier made of plastic, when it melts, makes an awful mess. So we had to come out of the house. The insurance company were wonderful as it happens, and they put us up in temporary accommodation and so forth. But that again interrupted my writing. My wife, I loved traveling, so obviously I did that as well. So that's why it took me 15 years to complete from Manhood to Godhead, as well as all the research. When it came to A Whisper in the Silence, that came about because of the pandemic. I said I wasn't going to write another book, but then the pandemic came, and I thought, I can't just sit around, I've got to do something. And so I decided to write that. And I did have a lot more time to actually sit down and get that continuity again, which was good. I completed writing that in just 1 year. Much shorter, of course, only the third of length, but I managed to complete that in 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, working through from Manhood to Godhead, I mean, as a kind of overall, I was thinking, well, this must have been like a kind of almost like initiatory experiencing itself. The whole process of having to write it out and all the work connected with that, but also it's funny you use that term initiatory, because when I was writing it,
my intention was not, it was indeed, as you say, a kind of initiatory experience for me, but I also hope to a degree it is to the reader as well. As you know, it is tied up with the Kabbalah heavily. It's tied up with the Tree of Life naturally because of that. And I do hope that at the end of it, by the time the reader is finished, they will have experienced something as well. Hopefully learnt various things they didn't know as well.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm not reading it twice for. I'm going to read it 3 times. I mean, like I say, it's my second way through, and there's so much. I mean, so much you can sort of take and pursue, which is what I which I always love in a book as well, and which is always a good sign. I mean, it's funny you say about it sort of your abilities increasing as you described them. Yeah, I mean, from my experience reading it, it was very readable, more of a workman-like read to start with. But when I got to the Paracelsus bit, I felt really invested more in the characters, and they came to life for me a lot more. And then as it went on, it just got better and better. So. So an enriching read.
It's good to hear that. And actually, what's interesting is if I said that the book wrote itself, that sounds awfully corny, but you've heard authors say that before. And there's some truth in that. And obviously, before you start a book, especially one as long as that, you have to have a nice, solid synopsis. You have to work out, roughly what's going to happen in each scene and what each scene is going to be. But it's surprising how, through coincidence, that things change. I was learning things that I never knew about these characters. The amount of what you could just call a coincidence. Good heavens, well, that links so much with that, and that links with that. And then slightly, the plot takes a slight change of route because of something that's come about. So from that aspect, it does slightly write itself. It won't be exactly how you intended to be when you first initially wrote that first synopsis.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, coming back to the point I was trying to make, I would very much like to see a book, particular. As you say, you got this the concept of the plane of rest and these other things, and I can see that there's a philosophy there which is that's not from Crowley,
No.
And then you've got. I can recognise things which are from Crowley and things from other things, and there's an underlying in the esoteric sort of hermeticism and so on. There's an underlying sort of underpinning to these ideas, these concepts. But it intrigued me. I was trying to pick the bones out of it, trying to think, this is the other thing. This is the. Yeah,
it's not so much the previous occult order I belong to. It's more my own beliefs. Now, I mean, obviously, as a dedicated Thelemite, very dedicated member of the OTO, and a huge believer in awful to what Crowley read as in Thelema, obviously, and that wonderful. But obviously, I do have some ideas of my own. I think that's healthy. I think that anything develops. If everyone were just stuck to everything Crowley said, for example, didn't question anything, didn't doubt anything, and that'd be a mistake. It's good to question. It's good to think about things. So certainly some of my own philosophy, if you like, came into it, as well as obviously that of Thelema and some other. For example, in A Whisper in the Silence, as Ken and I have been read it, there are some quotes I've used quite extensively. That was the idea to do with silence, do with naturism as well, but to do with silence in particular from a wide range of sources, not just Thelema, but from Buddhist sources, from Hindu sources, from all sorts of sources. And that, again, is what I want to do with that book, because although Thelema is the religion that I believe in, the religion I follow now, I have high regard, for example, the Hindu religion and the Buddhist religion, and some of their teachings are very good. I'm not saying I agree with all of them, and some I disagree with, quite strongly. But at the same time, I don't want to have a closed mind where I will only write about Thelema. I want in my writing to be able to promote Thelema, to make people who don't know about it have an interest in it, and then maybe Google it and find out more and hopefully get involved in it. But at the same time, it's important one has a wider field, I think, wider field of interest than just one thing and sticking to it. There'll be some things Crowley said that everyone's going to agree with, obviously. You don't have to agree with everything he said. Think about things and, take them as you want. But just although the core belief of the things Crowley was writing, they're my core belief as well. What you were actually seeing there was some of my own philosophy coming through as well.
Yeah, I think also there's a history of occult authors using fiction. I mean, obviously Crowley himself wrote fictional books, didn't he? And Dion Fortune, and so I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with doing that. You know, like you say, it's possibly the more creatively inclined writers tend to lean towards fiction, don't they, rather than like.
Well, I think so. Yeah, I mean, all these characters I write about, historical characters. There's been some very, very good, wonderful factual books written about them, and I don't know it needs me to write yet another one about them because they exist out there. And of course, with the internet now as well, it's all at their fingertips, and where you can find stuff so quickly. In the old days, of course, an author had to go to their library, often request a book, had to wait for it to come in. But now you can find something in just seconds, can't you, across the internet? So for a writer now, it's so much easier than it used to be to get the information you require. Yeah.
So just out of interest, what was it about Crowley's writing that really sort of spoke to you, do you think? Is there, any particular things you can put your finger on? Or?
Well, right from the start, I was recognizing truths there. I mean, I read the kind of bad things said about him, in the early press and things like that. I could see that just wasn't necessarily true. I'm not saying he was a perfect man, but to be a prophet, no one has to be perfect for that, whatever. But obviously, a lot of his work is difficult to understand, especially at the beginning. I do feel that on many occasions, Crowley perhaps found it a little bit difficult to write simply. He was an educated man, and he was very gifted. And it is difficult at the beginning for people to understand some of Crowley's writings. That may well be why the journalists were so anti-Crowley. One of the reasons why, because probably they couldn't understand what he was writing about, and they didn't bother to read what he was writing about anyway. Yeah, it was through reading his work. I mean, the Book of the Law had a tremendous impact on me. It really did. I mean, Crowley didn't write that. He received that from his guardian angel Awas. But the fact is that that just had so much impact on me. And it's very, very precious. I'm sure it's all Thelemites. I've got a Russian version. I've got all sorts of versions, different countries and things. But it's wonderful. And I personally as well think that Thelema is, I know some people question, is it a religion or not? To me, it is a religion, Thelema. And I think it's wonderful in so many ways. And I just wish, because religions have caused so much suffering in the world, especially the Christian religion, and there's one or two others which I don't want to talk about now, but I mean, that I think that the whole basis behind Thelema is good. And if everyone followed the Thelemic religion, I think the world would be a far better place. But it's not going to appeal to everybody, obviously. It's not going to appeal to everybody.
I suppose it would have to. I think it would have to resonate with. I think it's something. If a perspective, a worldview, a philosophy resonates with you, yeah. I mean, I don't. I mean, if everybody was a Thelemite, I mean, Thelema probably wouldn't exist because it wouldn't make sense. But I mean, it's interesting. I picked up on you saying religion then, but I mean, it's something you discuss from Manhood to Godhead. Is it a religion? And you question that, but that's interesting that you touch on that. Read the book. Read the book for the full. Read the book for the full explanation there.
Yeah, but obviously it is Thelema that we have the EGC and so forth. I mean, Crowley, as we know, he wrote the Gnostic Mass for the OTO specifically to be performed in public as well as privately. And I mean, that's wonderful as well. That the Gnostic Mass is a wonderful, wonderful ritual. And I think that any listeners who haven't been to a Gnostic Mass should try and go to one. I think it really will open their eyes, because there are ones which are done for the public to attend. And if they hear about this, they should apply to go along, because it'll be a real eye-opener for them. I think, well, obviously, yes, I think very highly of the OTO as a fraternity. I think Crowley did a brilliant job rewriting the original initiation rituals when he became head of the order. And I think, it is true. Obviously, the initiation rituals, the order's teachings are passed on. The only official rituals of the order are really the initiation rituals and the Gnostic Mass. Obviously, when you have meetings in our lodges, camps and oases, the different sorts of groups we have for meetings, obviously other forms of magic are studied, are practiced and so forth. But the initiations are the important thing. And I think for anyone interested in the occult, it would be really great for them to experience those initiations, that kind of sheer look of joy on some initiates' faces when they've had their initiation says so much for a start. And then if they take the trouble to really work on their degrees, because they're given degree papers so they can work through them, it gives recommended reading lists, recommended practices, different occult things to study and to practice, that sort of thing. If they do that, they can achieve so much and so much realization of truth and mysteries they probably would never imagine before.
I suppose the analogy of the initiatory experience and the initiations being the spine and the you have an inherited legacy there with the other work as well. It's an inherited legacy as well, as it is in Hermetic and occult fraternities of all sorts.
One thing that obviously we've had some more controversial guests on recently, that's like there's been a lot of mudslung at the OTO by some of these guests, and it's actually quite nice to hear someone from the other side of that saying, so could you talk about your experiences and because like I said, we've had some guests on recently that have possibly put off some of our listeners from the OTO, so it might be quite nice to have the voice from the other side, maybe talk a little bit about the kind of positive experiences you've had with the OTO, and
Well, certainly, I could only be positive because I've only had positive experiences. As members of Shemesh Lodge, it wasn't Hastings. My wife and I both privileged to take on active roles. I became the lodge treasurer for Shemesh, and that's how I eventually became Grand Treasurer General, because when the UK Grand Lodge was formed in May 2005, they needed to get a treasurer, and I don't think it quite worked out as anticipated initially. So then Frater Hyperion, the Grand Master of the UK Grand Lodge, he asked me in September 2005 if I would consider becoming Grand Treasurer General, which I was absolutely delighted and honoured to take on that role, of course. I think that having that involvement is important. If I just gone along to meetings, sat there and done all the taking, if you like, it wouldn't have been as much as getting involved and doing things. And also with Shemesh Lodge, although I never wanted to be a body head, I did prepare things. For example, I went a lot of trouble preparing things for their Pan ritual 1 year, and did a lot of study on that and work on it. And so I became involved. I think if you actually become really involved in something as much as you can, I think that you get far more out. In other words, what you put in, you get out of it. And that's from an involvement on the administrative side, but also from a magical point of view. The more you put in, the more you get out. If you don't bother to do the work, you're not going to make much advancement from that point of view. So I think because I was involved, I think that's why my experience has been so positive. I was obviously fortunate that the position came up for Grand Treasurer General, because it means from an admin point of view, I'm on the kind of central administrative bit for the UK Grand Lodge. I get to meet people in, let's say, slightly higher positions in other countries as well, and so I've been very fortunate in that from that point of view. I think that Crowley did a brilliant job in rewriting those original initiation rituals, as I said. As far as you mentioned about the criticism, I'll say a couple of things on that. First of all, some people will obviously access through pirated copies of our rituals. They'll access some of those online. A couple of books have been published with those in as well, of course, but it's not the same as attending initiation. You just read those. First of all, there are inaccuracies in them, a lot of inaccuracies. And there are things that happen at initiations at several different levels which are not written down on paper. So you're not going to get the full initiatory experience by reading either in a book or online that you think those initiations are. There's more to it than that. And they only work in a temple with a proper initiator, and not, as I say, from some pirated script. Now, I'm not on social media. When you mentioned about, some people, say bad things about it. Well, that's fine. It's not for everyone. I'm made aware, though, on social media from time to time of when there is criticism about the order. It's a bit misleading for the general public, if you like, if they hear this, because when you get a name, it doesn't mean anything. Like I know as Grand Treasurer John the name of every single member who is a member of the UK Grand Lodge at the moment. I also know the people who have been members in those 17 years I've been Grand Treasurer General. There's an awful lot of names come. I don't know who they are, especially if it could be people from America or the other country. I've got no idea if they're members of the OTO or not, whether they were ever in the OTO. And in fact, some as it turns out, either they're people who have left and were only Minerval or first. When I say only, I don't mean that in a bad way, because for example, there's a high up member of the order who always reminds us all that we're all Minervals. And that's quite true. We are. We're always learning all the time. None of us have perfected anything. So for that point, it's true. So I'm not going to say it, but though, obviously the Minerval is a kind of welcome guest into the order. And then the first degree is an introductory degree and so forth, very important at symbolism. But if someone's only, say, been a Minerval or even a first degree, they know very little about the order, as well as, the what they're supposed to learn in that through the initiations. So when they go online and start speaking in a critical way, it's difficult for them really to do so if they haven't had that full experience. And if they've never been a member at all, I find it very difficult for them to then really be critical of the order. If it's a member who is critical, obviously we're only too happy to talk to them about, discuss it with them, make changes necessary, maybe even. But if not a member even, I don't think there's an awful lot we can do about it, really. So I do think people who hear criticism being made about the order should be very careful before taking it too seriously. They should say, what experience this person making this criticism got of the order, of the order's teachings, of the order's initiation, and indeed of Crowley. What have they read? I mean, I've seen or been shown criticism of the highest degrees of the OTO online by people who I know were only Minerval and first degree. And they could not have any real understanding of those higher degree secrets, as some people refer them to, being a member, just being a Minerval or first degree. So to be making, if they like comments and criticisms about the higher degrees, is total nonsense in that scenario.
Yeah, I guess because of the success, I suppose, of the OTO, it's an easy target as well, isn't it? Compared to other orders, it's like, and obviously the Crowley being the kind of superstar of the occult that he is as well, it does really, it leads, to me, it always feels like it's a bit of an easy target.
Sometimes it's professional jealousy. I mean, I think in people have to have their own experiences, and I think it's true of all fraternal bodies or initiatory experiences, is that, all intellect is paper. I mean, and the lived reality of it, or if you read a book on swimming, it's nothing like, it's nothing like actually the experience of learning to swim, and that's where the initiation takes place. It doesn't take place on paper or online, and that's important. I suppose people do have various experiences depending upon the personalities they encounter and where they happen to arrive, where they, in some parts of the world are better catered for from an OTO point of view than others, and it's not just, and that's not peculiar to the OTO.
It's just in general organisations of people, there will always be clashes of personality and things like that. That's quite common, I think. But anyway,
yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, I just think that will always happen, of course, but hopefully a lot of differences can be forgotten when you're in the temple, and should be forgotten in the temple. I mean, it's a bit like in From Manhood to Godhead, in the Elias Ashmole chapter, for example, that is at the time of the English Civil War. Now, Freemasons at the time would have been on both sides, if you like, but it was a rule. When they came together for Masonic meetings, any difference was forgotten whilst they were in the temple, in their Masonic temples. And I think that should be true. You might have political difference, also things. None of that at all should come into the temple.
So let's talk a little bit about your actual books, starting with From Manhood to Godhead. Maybe give us a kind of summary, or some kind of overview of From Manhood to Godhead, and then we'll go on to the newer book.
Okay, yeah, right. So From Manhood to Godhead, the many lives of Jean Vassar. By the way, let's call that. Well, first of all, From Manhood to Godhead has a double meaning, which the reader will realise as the book goes on. There's a lot about sacred sexuality in it, so there's a tip on that. Jean Vassar, that is the name of the first character in the book. The first he's born. The first time not the first time he's born, I don't know, but the fact is, the first time he appears in the book, he is Jean Vassar. That's why it's many lives.
The initial,
many lives.
the
initial one which appears in the book.
The initial narrator.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's not the narrator. The narrator is the voice. Now, the voice, by the way, I was a bit upset when, towards the end of writing the book, a series appeared on television about singers called The Voice. Or, oh dear, but it had to be the voice. It went back to Blavatsky, things like that, talking about the voice of silence, etc. And that's why it was called The Voice. The voice appears in the book. Likewise, originally, by the way, the book was going to be called The Journey. And then Tony Blair brought out his biography called The Journey. And when I actually Googled The Journey, I found there were hundreds of books called The Journey, and that's why I came up with the title. Anyway, to just read the back of what it says at the back, for those who haven't seen it, this is it. This compelling occult novel tells the story of Jean Vassar's journey through many lives as he discovers the hidden secret doctrines of reincarnation, sacred sexuality, magic, alchemy, masonry, Kabbalah, mysticism, Egyptian Freemasonry, and carefully explained occult symbolism. The wondrous knowledge he attains through authentic rituals and previously veiled initiations dismisses once and for all the perceived finality of death. In his determined and uplifting attempt to ascend the tree of life in search of the crown of divinity, Jean is encouraged by a mysterious entity. This spiritual guide from the angelic realms of the astral is known initially to him in the silence simply as the Voice. Jean's inspiring tale begins in the French town of Béziers, and through the miracle of rebirth continues for hundreds of years. His ever-evolving soul travels all over the world and incredibly far beyond to planes previously unimagined. In doing so, he is counseled, influenced, and hugely affected by many real-life historical characters. Their vitally important teachings are brought to life once more, mainly in their own words. They include the persecuted Cathars, the Knights Templar, Gilles de Rais, a medieval law executor as a serial killer, Paracelsus, the Swiss physician, philosopher, and alchemist, John Dee, the astrologer, occult philosopher, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Of course, Edward Kelly, the occultist, alchemist, and medium. Elias Ashmole, the alchemist, astrologer, early Freemason, and that was during the turbulent times of the English Civil War and the Great Fire of London. Count Cagliostro, the occultist Freemason initiator of Egyptian Freemasonry. The Count de Saint-Germain, said to have lived for hundreds of years. William Blake, the visionary poet, painter, and printmaker. Pascal Beverly Randolph, the African-American doctor, medium, and occultist at the time of the American Civil War. Elvis Levy, the celebrated French occultist and ceremonial magician. Plus, of course, Aleister Crowley, the highly influential occultist, author, ceremonial magician, and prophet of Thelema. So they're all in there, a lot of characters as well. There are some fictional characters, side characters, like maybe a girlfriend of the central character, her parents or whatever, but those historical characters are in there, and by and large, their biographies are real as they happened. And a lot of their biographies are followed in each chapter. Yeah. So that's a little bit about the book.
And then, obviously, A Whisper in the Silence came out. What kind of maybe we could talk a little bit about naturalism or nudism, depending on which region you're in. I believe that's the case, isn't it? They are the same thing.
Well, I mean, yes, the way that came about, so I was going to write just a straightforward book about silence, the importance of silence. And I thought, well, yes, it could be a novel. I had this idea about Ollie and Emma. Now, this is the idea. I mean, if I read the back of that, I just...
Let's go for that. Yeah.
So it's I describe it as an inspiring naturist love story. Inspiring because I hope it's inspirational, because especially those wonderful quotes from famous spiritual people, but an inspiring naturist love story. So we have a private desert island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a deep-thinking multimillionaire seeking solitude, silence, and a naturist lifestyle. The unexpected arrival of a beautiful young glamour model in need of Prosecco and noisy parties. Mismatch, humour, spiritual wisdom, near tragedy, and all-conquering love. One unforgettable, heartwarming tale. So I had this idea, as I say, as Ollie had this experience and he wants to find silence somewhere. The book describes how in the novel, obviously, he searched for silence and eventually he leased this, because of the huge fortune he had when he sold his business and that, he leased this island, in fact, in Fiji, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And he's gone there to find this silence. I know that from a spiritual point of view, you can find silence anywhere. But the fact is, he thought it'd be easier if he could find silence away from the noise of London and all that. He could go somewhere. So he went and lived on this island, intentionally by himself in solitude. And then we had Emma Eve. And she is a glamour model, a very, very attractive glamour model, very, very popular. She does glamour modeling as opposed to fashion modeling. So she quite often does not wear clothes. Sometimes it's skimpy bikinis and things. Sometimes she's completely naked because of photo shoots for naturist magazines and things like that. And because of something which goes horribly wrong with her holiday plans, she ends up on that island. And it develops from there. And not only that, but because of Ollie's interest in Crowley and the occult and Thelema, there's all that he talks to her about. They have some strange experiences on that. The Holy Guardian Angel plays a very important part in the story. So it's a book which definitely appeals to naturists and also should appeal to people interested in the occult and Thelema as well. Interestingly, I can tell you that A Whisper in the Silence has actually outsold for Manhood and Godhead by at least 10 times, at least that. The majority of sales are on ebook, on the Kindle ebook. It's also available, that particular, the second book. The first book was only available on Amazon. It's in several countries available, but only on Amazon. The Whisper in the Silence is actually also available from iTunes, iBookshaw. So if people got iPads and that, they can get it for that. And it's also available in bookshops. You can't just go and bookshop and pick a copy up, unfortunately, but you can order a copy and you can get a copy that way. And also H&E Next magazine, they sell copies of it as well. So there's, and also it's available from Barnes & Noble as well, and Kobo books as well, for those who've got Kobo readers as opposed to Kindle readers and that sort of thing. So it's got a kind of wider market that people can go. So I don't think it's any reason that it's selling. I think that as a naturist book, it came out at the same time. There are lots of factual naturist books out there, and there's also a lot of naturist books about, let's say, whodunits, that sort of thing, whodunits in a naturist resort or something like that. Some of them are rather short stories rather than full-length novels. But so I think I hit that kind of naturist market exactly the right time. Obviously, I did know a bit about naturism. I've been quite open. The fact is, yes, I'm a naturist. My wife and I have been to naturist resorts around the world. I first found naturism when I was a DJ, when I wandered by accident, as I think I was chatting with Mark earlier about his new word accident. But as I walked onto the naturist beach in Brighton, that's where I first discovered it. I say since then, I've visited with my wife resorts all over the world. I will just quickly at this point tell you a little funny story about when we were early on in a naturist resort called Costa Natura, a wonderful resort. It's in Estepona on the Costa del Sol, and it's a white village. Now, if people know that area of Spain, the white village is normally up in the mountains. This particular one is on the coast. It was Spain's first official naturist resort, and it's on the coast. It's a lovely resort. And the first time we went there, we had an apartment there, and I got into magic, and I decided one day to do the Rose Cross ritual. That, of course, is not a Thelemic ritual. It's a Golden Dawn ritual, but it's a wonderful ritual, one that I use quite a lot when I'm working on my own. This particular time, being a naturist resort, I wasn't wearing any clothes, and I was doing the Rose Cross ritual using an inset stick. And for those who know, you begin by drawing the Rose Cross in each of the quarters, saying the appropriate words or vibrating the particular words you should be saying at that point. And then you go to the center and you draw it above you with the inset stick and then below you. And when I come to draw it above me, I'd totally forgotten that there was a spinning ceiling fan above me in this resort. And so as I went to draw the Rose Cross above me, it promptly chopped the incense stick in half, sending sparks flying all over my naked body. So I used that in a magazine article I wrote, and I called it Singe of the Flesh. So there are occasions maybe when one has to be a bit careful practicing magic naked. I did actually talk about this somewhere else about this, and I actually talked about the banishing ritual of the pentagram. And I was saying how different is if you do that naked, and when you stand there, at one point, just in a natural way somehow, it's totally different to doing it with your ceremonial robes on. And I think with magic, there's time when if I'm working at home, obviously when I'm working in OTO environment, I've always got my robes on, of course. If I'm at home, sometimes I wear robes, sometimes I work without robes. It depends on what I'm doing and what feels right, and also what the temperature is as well, obviously, because naturists aren't naked all the time. If it's cold, you put something on. So there we are, that's that. That's how I found naturism. I do want to hear a little bit about naturism at all. There are benefits, of course, to naturism. Most naturists realize it's not just the personality that matters. It's not what someone looks like. I mean, it's a great way to meet people from all walks of life. It's a great kind of equaling up thing when people aren't wearing clothes. And naturists tend to be very friendly because of their shared interest in naturism. They like to talk about which clubs they've gone to, what wonderful beaches there are, resorts and so forth. And naturally talk about the weather, because the weather plays a big bearing, as you can understand. No pun meant in the word bearing, by the way, but a great bearing on naturism. In a naturist setting, obviously becomes aware very quickly, becomes aware that people are fat, they're thin, they've got lumps, they've got bumps, they've got saggy bits, they've got scars, their lives well lived. And seeing this makes people far more accepting and loving of their own bodies. They can let go quite quickly of their long-held hang-ups and accept that there's no part of the body which is shameful or dirty. This also helps with a multitude of other physical problems and psychological problems. It reduces worries, it reduces stress levels, and it improves mental health and boosts self-esteem. There's been quite a bit of scientific actual work done on this, looking into the benefits of naturism, which are all coming to the surface now. Many experts also think that being naked is better for the skin, allows the skin to breathe, eliminating excess sweating, toxins, inflammation of the skin follicles, improves blood circulation. Fresh air, of course, also good on the skin, and no doubt good for you. Not to mention, of course, getting plenty of vitamin D. It detoxifies. Sorry, I've got the teeth back in a minute. It detoxifies the skin and boosts your kind of body in many, many ways. You have to be careful at the same time, of course, not to overdo it. Use protective sun lotion and that sort of thing. The British Naturism, which is the official naturist body in this country, which has, as I say, several thousand members, they're quite keen to always point out that naturism is not about sex. Because someone's naked doesn't mean they're thinking about sex. Naturists, like anyone, have sex, obviously, but in the appropriate place, in privacy. But it is important that people realize that because people are naked doesn't mean they're thinking sexual thoughts and that sort of thing. And obviously that sort of thing wouldn't be tolerated, sex in the nature of resorts and so forth, because it's looked down upon. And even, for example, naturists, one of the things they do, they carry a small towel with them. So when you're sitting down for hygiene reasons, you sit on a towel. If you sit down on commonly used chairs and without using a towel, it's rather looked down upon. That's just a hygiene thing. But it is something, it's not for everyone. It's very difficult to really describe the benefits of naturism to people as they try it themselves. Some people say, I can never do that, never do that. It's surprising how many people are saying the pandemic did try at home, first of all. British Nature's numbers, they shot up during the pandemic. And also their online offering as well, where they couldn't have meetings, they started doing naked online yoga, all sorts of naked classes and things. And that became such a huge thing that although now things are opening up and people are going along to their many varied events they do, they're also keeping their online events going as well because they've become so popular. So as I say, I think with Whisper in the Silence, I hit the right thing at the right time with A Whisper in the Silence. So that's really how that all came about.
One thing I noticed that is in both books, and something you seem to write about, is sacred sexuality, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. What is sacred sexuality, and why do you feel it's important? Well,
sacred sexuality is, to me, the combination of sexuality and spirituality. It's the two. The two are combined, whether people like it, the two are heavily combined. When you start looking at symbolism, for example, it's very, very important. In both books, a lot about symbolism. In A Whisper in the Silence, but we've got a lot of symbolism about even like things like palm trees and that. There's an awful lot more in From Manhood to Godhead. Sacred sex has been around since probably the caveman or whatever. It is a very, very important aspect. It's something that I think everyone should study. I don't want to go into a lot of detail. I want people to read about it in the books, in both books. There's an awful lot in there about the symbolism behind sexuality, the importance of sexuality as well, from a spiritual point of view as well.
I know it's something Crowley was obviously very influenced by sex and sexuality, and obviously, in particular, sex magic was his kind of. It appeared to sort of become his main focus, especially towards the end of his life. Do you think there's a crossover? Obviously, there is a crossover, but would you say that kind of involvement with Crowley's magic has kind of inspired your interest in sacred sexuality? Or
it started before Crowley. Actually, I read books about sacred sexuality before I actually read any Crowley. So it started before then, and from quite a young age, I realized there's something sacred about sex. I realized there's some link between the two. Then as I started reading more about it, obviously I could see why there was. What we must remember is that sex magic is part of sacred sexuality. Sacred sexuality covers a far wider range than just sex magic. Sex magic is a very important aspect of magic, a very powerful and important part of magic, as I say, but it's not the only part of sacred sexuality. There are a lot more aspects of sacred sexuality which are important as well, which again, people will read about in both books.
So I was wondering, would you like to give us some more, another reading perhaps from the new book? Or
I'm just reading what I can read without giving.
We don't want to give any of the spoilers.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think, by the way. With From Manhood to Godhead, to tie in with this podcast, as a little thank you, and I've managed to reduce the Kindle price down to half its original price. In this country, UK, it's down to $3.99 from $7.99, and similarly, it's been reduced in the other currencies in other countries as well. So it makes even better value. It wasn't possible to do that with the paperback because being 644 pages, the printing costs alone are quite a huge amount. And then by the time Amazon have taken their share, if I reduced it, I actually wouldn't make anything. I make a loss on it, in fact. And in Australia, where it's also available, in fact, the printing costs are even higher. And if I'd reduce down the paperback version, I'd actually make a loss in every copy I sold. So we could do it with the Kindle. That's not a problem, because with Kindle, obviously, the ebook version, there's no printing costs at all. And now there's no VAT on ebooks. There was to start with, but there's no VAT on ebooks either. So it has to be reduced down. So it makes it more affordable, people now. A Whisper in the Silence is only $2.99. Always has been. It's $2.99 for the ebook version anyway. I wanted to keep that as cheap as possible, and the paperback's only $7.99, so that's much more affordable than it is a much shorter book.
Well, we'll make sure to add links to that in the show notes as well. So if you're interested in picking up a copy on Kindle copy, especially, we'll put links to where you can buy the book.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, For Manhood to Godhead, it's only available on Kindle. That was only published on Amazon as a Kindle ebook and as a paperback. I did read out a bit overnight all the other kind of outlets that the A Whisper in the Silence is available from. So people have a wider choice of where they want to get that from. I'm just wondering what I can read. I don't just open a page at random, A Whisper in the Silence. I'm trying to think what I could read without actually, obviously, discuss nature and the great. Emma, although she was a glamour model, by the way, used to sometimes modeling naked. She never considered herself a naturist at all, but she really takes to it in the book. She really does. She really takes to it, and it changes her way of thinking as well about it. That's why how useless clothes are to some degree, and why do you need them? I mean, in the case of A Whisper in the Silence, you've got two people alone on their own desert island. There's Benny, a pilot who flies in their supplies every couple of weeks from the mainland. Apart from him and an unexpected visitor, which I won't talk about for now, a government official. Apart from that, they're totally alone on their desert, on their desert island. So from that point of view, there's no problem with being naturists there, although it is officially illegal in Fiji. But because no one's coming to their island, no one knows that they're being naturists. I did say that British naturism was very careful to point out that naturism isn't about sex. Now, there isn't much sex in the Whisper Side, but there is some sex, because obviously it's a love story. And if there was no sex at all between a couple alone on a desert island, if there was no sex took place, I think it'd be a bit strange. So there is some sex in it, but it's written I hope you thought reading it in a sensitive, a creative way, rather than in something which is might upset some people,
Yeah, no, it's tactful.
Yeah, that's how it intended to be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent.
And also there was obviously some sex in from Manhood to God as well, and that as well, particularly that is symbolic. I mean, it's written in a symbolic way as well, so that again that links in with the sacred sexuality side.
So do you have any plans for further books now? Have you got the bug now? Now you've written two?
Well, I have a few ideas. I mean, I have got some jobs around the house. Having been Grand Treasurer General for 17 years, I've got big box files, 17 of them piled up. I've got to sort through what I need to keep and not keep of those, because we've got a small house and I need to make some room. I need to paint the bathroom, various things. But I'm afraid the writing bug stuck with me now. The two central characters, Ollie and Emma, in A Whisper in Silence, have turned out to be very popular with readers. I've had some wonderful reviews on both books, but the two main characters, especially in A Whisper in Silence, seem to have been, really taken to by the readers. As the author, having created them, I actually care about them quite a bit. I know it sounds a bit daft, but I find myself thinking, I wonder what they're doing now. I wonder how they got through the winter. I wonder if they managed to avoid any typhoons. I wonder, and so I think perhaps I feel obliged to really carry on their story a little bit longer and develop that. It also occurred to me that being on an island like that, they obviously can't do initiations, OTO initiating like that. It's just the two of them there. Although Ollie is extremely interested in the OTO and Coronet and so forth, he's only read about it. He hasn't been initiating the OTO at that stage, certainly. And so he can't initiation whatever on the island. So it just strikes me there's a lot more simple forms of magic they could do. They could do elemental magic, for example, which Ollie has actually read quite a bit about and has tried some of the ritual magic, some of the magic, in the magic. And also, of course, we got the elementals. I mean, what a wonderful place, a beautiful, beautiful white-sanded desert island to actually work with the elementals. So I think this is something which could appeal to people. When I'm writing for people who aren't necessarily occult, so I'm going to be a bit careful. If I get too heavily into that, they'll find it very difficult to understand. That's why I try to keep it simple in A Whisper in Silence when I came to writing about Coronet and Thelema, Holy Garden Angel and so forth. And it would have to be the same with this. But I think that they could... I think they'd be quite fascinated to read about the elementals and about maybe Emma especially maybe finding a link with the elementals. So I think that is quite an interesting idea. So it might be something I actually look at further as I get time, perhaps start putting a synopsis together for it.
That sounds good. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time, Trevor. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you back on soon, especially if you write a new book.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm pleased that you both enjoyed the books you have read and that, and I hope that anyone out there does it. I've had some wonderful reviews, and I'm so grateful for those people who've given me good reviews, because it does help so much in sales. I've never aimed to try and make money out of my writing. What I want to do is I want to leave something behind when I go. That's my main thing. And it's time for me to pass on. And I want to pass on to people as well these wonderful ideas, not just about kind of things, some of my own thoughts as well. And I want them to do it in a way where they can enjoy a really good story at the same time. So as I say, anyone out there who hasn't read the books and does, I hope they thoroughly enjoy them. I hope they give feedback. And to any Thelemites out there, I must finish by saying, love is the law, love under will.
Indeed.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Gray, for your book and your time. And another thing is, well, it made me laugh. I threw my head back in laughter at certain parts of it, as well as burn my toast on occasion because
I'm pleased you did that. That was deliberate. There is some humour there, but also there's even more humour deliberately in A Whisper in the Silence as well, because I wanted it to be a lighter read. So yes, it's meant to make people laugh. So I hope you had a good smile at certain points in that.
Well, I threw my head back and had a good old proper laugh. Yeah, definitely.
Does us good to do that, doesn't it?
Excellent.
Especially with what's going on in the world at the moment. Yes, we all need it, don't we?
And we are back. That was an interesting interview, wasn't it? It's
yeah, absolutely. And then I think I hope that encourages people that actually make the time to read the book. And I am, and I had got a great deal out of it. So I mean, I think persist with the book, read the book, and the Manhood Godhead one is the one I'm familiar with. So, but I at some point will certainly enjoy both of them.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? You don't often see, especially Thelemic fiction, that often anymore, do you? It's more. I mean, you used to see a lot of it at one point. I don't really see. I mean, this is the first one I can think of in recent memory. Actually, I don't know.
That's a very important thing. I mean, would it be? I mean, I suppose that you could regard it as Thelemic. I mean, the from Manhood to Godhead, it is. It is a very broad thing. I mean, it deals with a great deal of sort of different alchemy and all these emeticism.
Well, you can say the same about this book, actually.
Yeah. But I suppose the underpinning, the core thing. I mean, it accumulates. I mean, without giving any spoilers, the sort of climax of the book is it focuses on Crowley in more recent history.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and I guess the same with this, although there is a full cast of other spiritual characters and philosophies as well. But it's always interesting to see these ideas presented through different mediums, and I think this is what Trevor does quite well.
Yeah, and I think that was his intention. I mean, I still hope out that Mr. Gray will relent and do a sort of straight sort of philosophy, or a straight essay type work, and then but yeah, I mean it's got the kind of it's got the sort of lubricant of sort of fiction to sort of wind you in, sort of get you sort of into the whole narrative. So
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so we will be back next week, but do not forget to join us on the social media. We're sitting now, one word, on most places. YouTube in particular, maybe even by the time you hear this, we'll be up to 1,000 subscribers, which is, it's a nice milestone. And also, maybe by the time this is up, there should be some new video content, which I've been filming. It's complementary, I would say, to the podcast and the site. It's presented in a different format, but it's similar in tone and topic. So yeah, hopefully you can go and check that out. Obviously I'll mention that for definite when it goes up, but we have a whole host of video stuff planned, and regular video stuff planned to complement the podcast and to complement the site. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you next time. I'm not sure who it's with, but we'll see you there, and see you next time. Bye bye.